Dale Mercer had been running custom harvest crews for 19 years when he took the North Dakota contract. He was 44 years old, based out of Woodward, Oklahoma, and he operated one of the most respected independent harvesting operations in the Central Plains. His company was called Mercer Custom Harvest. He ran 6 combines, 4 grain carts, 8 semis, and a crew of 14 people. They followed the wheat harvest from Texas to Canada every summer, cutting for farms that didn't own enough equipment to handle their own acreage. Dale's reputation was built on reliability. He showed up on time, finished on schedule, and left clean fields. He charged premium rates because he delivered premium results. His clients trusted him, his crew respected him, and his equipment was solid. 3 of his 6 combines were Massey Ferguson 9505s, big machines, 507 horsepower each, 40-foot headers. Self-leveling, state-of-the-art. He had financed all 3 of them between 2019 and 2021. They were the backbone of his fleet, and in May 2023, he bet everything on them. The contract came through a broker in late April. A corporate farm management group in North Dakota needed a crew to harvest 18,000 acres of spring wheat near Minot. The timeline was tight. The wheat would be ready by mid-July, and they needed the entire operation cut in 12 days. 12 days for 18,000 acres was aggressive. That meant cutting 1,500 acres per day, every day, with no weather delays, no breakdowns, no margin for error. The payout was $95,000, plus fuel reimbursement and a $20,000 bonus if they finished early. Dale ran the numbers. 1,800 miles from Oklahoma to North Dakota, 4 days to mobilize, 12 days to cut, 3 days to demobilize. The fuel cost alone would be $32,000. Labor, lodging, and food for the crew would run another $18,000. Repairs and maintenance would cost at least $8,000. If everything went perfectly, he would net around $57,000. But if anything went wrong, the margins would collapse fast. Dale looked at the contract for 3 days. He talked to his crew boss, he talked to his wife, he talked to his mechanic. Everyone said the same thing. It was a risk, it was a long way from home, it was a brutal timeline. But $95,000 was $95,000, and Dale's season had been slow. He needed the work. He signed the contract. The crew mobilized on July 2nd, 6 combines on trailers, 4 grain carts, 8 semis, 2 service trucks, 3 personal vehicles. The convoy rolled out of Woodward at 5 a.m. and headed north. It took 4 days to reach Minot. The route went through Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota. 1,800 miles of interstate, 2-lane highways, and truck stops. The equipment held up on the drive. No breakdowns, no delays. They arrived at the staging area outside Minot on July 5th. The client met them at the site. He was a site manager for the corporate farm group, a man in his 50s named Rick, who ran operations for a portfolio of over 40,000 acres. Rick walked Dale through the fields. 18,000 acres split across 4 sections. The wheat looked good. Thick stands, minimal lodging, dry conditions. Rick said they needed it done fast because another crew was scheduled to move in for barley immediately after. If Dale's crew ran over schedule, it would cascade delays across the entire operation. Dale said he understood. Rick handed him the field maps and the grain delivery contracts. He said the elevator would be open 24 hours during the harvest window. Dale nodded. They shook hands. The job started the next morning. Day 1 went smooth. The crew started cutting at 6 a.m., all 6 combines running. The Massey Ferguson 95.5s were pulling the heaviest loads, cutting the thickest sections. The wheat was yielding better than expected, around 52 bushels per acre. The grain carts shuttled between the combines and the semis. The semis ran to the elevator in Minot and back. By sundown, they had cut 1,200 acres. Dale was pleased. They were slightly behind the 1,500-acre daily target, but not critically. He figured they could make it up over the next few days. The crew ate dinner at a truck stop, refueled the machines, and went to a motel for 6 hours of sleep. They were back in the field at 5 a.m. the next morning. Day 2 started with a problem. One of the grain carts blew a hydraulic line at 7 a.m. The repair took 3 hours. That put them behind schedule immediately. Dale pushed the crew to make up time. They ran until 10 p.m., cutting by the light of the combine LEDs. By the end of the day, they had cut 1,300 acres. Still short of target. Dale started feeling pressure. They were 2 days in and already 400 acres behind. He called a crew meeting that night. He told them they needed to push harder, longer hours, faster turns, no wasted time. The crew understood. They were professionals. They knew what the contract demanded. But some of them were already exhausted. 18-hour days in a combined cab was brutal work. The noise, the dust, the heat, the vibration, it wore people down fast. One of the younger operators, a guy named Mason who was running one of the Massey Ferguson 955s, said he was feeling it. Dale told him to push through. They didn't have a choice. Mason nodded and went back to his room. Day 3 was when the weather started to turn. The forecast had been clear for the entire harvest window, but by mid-afternoon, clouds were building on the western horizon. Dark, tall, anvil-shaped. Dale watched them through binoculars from the staging area. He radioed the crew and told them to keep cutting. They worked until 9 p.m. when the first drops of rain started falling. Light rain. Not enough to stop, but enough to slow things down. The wheat got damp. The combines started slugging. The headers clogged more frequently. Dale made the call to shut down for the night. They had cut 1,100 acres. 3 days in, they were 900 acres behind schedule. Dale sat in his truck and stared at the field maps. The math was turning against him. If they didn't catch up, they would miss the 12-day deadline. Missing the deadline meant forfeiting the $20,000 early completion bonus. It also meant paying the crew for extra days without additional revenue. Dale did the calculation. Every extra day cost him about $4,000 in labor and expenses. If they ran 2 days over, that was $8,000. If they ran 4 days over, the profit margin disappeared completely. He needed the weather to hold. He needed the machines to hold. He needed everything to go right. And so far, nothing was going right. Day 4 started dry. The rain had passed. The wheat dried out by mid-morning. The crew went back to cutting. Dale pushed them to run 20-hour shifts. They cut from 5 a.m. to 1 a.m., rotating operators every 8 hours to avoid fatigue breakdowns. By the end of the day, they had cut 1,700 acres. A good day. They were finally making up ground. The crew was exhausted, but morale was holding. Dale felt like they had turned a corner. That feeling lasted until day 5, when Mason's Massey Ferguson 9505 threw a rod. It happened at 3 p.m. Mason was cutting through a heavy section of wheat when the engine made a sound like a gunshot. A loud metallic bang followed by a horrible grinding noise. He shut the machine down immediately and radioed Dale. Dale drove out to the field. He climbed up into the cab and tried to restart the engine. It wouldn't turn over. He popped the hood and looked at the engine block. There was a hole in the side of the block the size of a fist. Oil was pouring out onto the ground. A connecting rod had broken, punched through the cylinder wall, and destroyed the engine. The Massey Ferguson was dead, completely dead. It would need a full engine replacement, and that wasn't happening in the middle of a North Dakota wheat field. Dale stood there staring at the machine, doing the math in his head. He was now down to 5 combines. He had lost one of his 3 Massey Fergusons. The machine was worth $270,000. He still owed $140,000 on the loan, and it was sitting in a field 1,800 miles from home, unfixable. Dale called a local Massey Ferguson dealer in Minot. He explained the situation. The dealer said they could tow the combine to their lot and store it, but they didn't have the capacity to do a full engine replacement in the middle of harvest season. The earliest they could even look at it was September. Dale asked what it would cost to tow. The dealer said $1,500. Dale agreed. The tow truck came the next morning and hauled the dead Massey Ferguson off the field. Dale reassigned Mason to one of the backup combines and kept cutting. They were now 5 days into the job, down 1 machine and still 600 acres behind schedule. The pressure was becoming unbearable. Day 6 brought more problems. The weather turned again. This time it wasn't rain. It was hail. A freak summer hailstorm rolled through at 2 p.m., pounding the fields with ice the size of marbles. The crew scrambled to get the combines under cover, but there wasn't much cover to find. The hail lasted 20 minutes. When it stopped, The wheat was damaged. Not destroyed, but beaten down. Lodged, tangled, harder to cut. The combines had to slow down to avoid clogging the headers. Productivity dropped by 30%. What should have been a 1,700-acre day turned into a 1,200-acre day. Dale stood in the field after the hail and wanted to scream. The weather was killing him. The equipment was killing him. The timeline was killing him. But he couldn't quit. He had signed a contract. He had moved his entire operation 1,800 miles. He had to finish. Quitting wasn't an option. Day 7 was the breaking point for one of his crew members. A combine operator named Josh, who had been with Dale for 4 seasons, walked into the staging area at 6 a.m. and said he was done. He said the hours were too long, the pressure was too much, and he couldn't do it anymore. He said he was driving back to Oklahoma. Dale tried to talk him out of it. He offered him a bonus. He offered him extra pay. Josh said no. He said his body was breaking down and his mental health was shot. He packed his truck and left. Dale watched him drive away and felt something inside him crack. He was down to 13 crew members. He was down to 5 combines. He was 7 days into a 12-day job and still 400 acres behind, and one of his most experienced operators had just quit. Dale reassigned the crew schedules, consolidated the shifts, and kept pushing. There was nothing else to do. Day 8 was when the second Massey Ferguson caught fire. It was 11 p.m. One of the operators, a woman named Carol, was cutting a section near the northern boundary when she smelled smoke. She checked the cab ventilation system. Nothing. She checked the exhaust. Nothing. Then she looked out the side window and saw flames coming from the engine compartment. She shut down the combine immediately, grabbed the fire extinguisher, and tried to put it out. The flames were too big. She radioed for help and evacuated the cab. By the time Dale and 2 other crew members arrived with extinguishers, the fire had spread to the wiring harness and the hydraulic lines. They managed to knock down the flames, but the damage was catastrophic. The engine was scorched. The electrical system was melted. The cab interior was smoke damaged. The Massey Ferguson 9505 was totaled. Dale stood next to the burned machine in the dark, flashlight in hand, and felt his chest tighten. He had just lost his second Massey Ferguson in 3 days. Both machines were financed. Both were critical to the operation. And both were gone. The fire had been caused by a fuel line that had cracked under stress and sprayed diesel onto the hot exhaust manifold. A maintenance issue that should have been caught during preseason inspection. But Dale's crew had been running so hard for so long that small things were getting missed, and now it had cost him a $270,000 machine. Dale called his insurance company the next morning. They said they would send an adjuster, but it would take a week. Dale said he didn't have a week. The adjuster said that was the best they could do. Dale asked about the payout. The adjuster said they would assess the damage and determine actual cash value. Dale knew what that meant. The combine had been worth around $220,000 before the fire. After the fire, it was worth maybe $30,000 in salvage. Insurance would probably pay out $130,000. Dale still owed $155,000 on the loan. That meant he would be $25,000 underwater on a machine that no longer existed. He hung up the phone and sat in his truck, staring at nothing. He had started this job with 6 combines. He was now down to 4. 2 of his 3 Massey Fergusons were gone. And he still had 5 days of cutting ahead of him. Day 9 was the longest day of Dale's life. The crew worked from 4 a.m. to 2 a.m. the next morning, 22 hours. They cut 1,900 acres. It was a heroic effort, but it broke people. 2 operators reported severe back pain. One reported blurred vision from exhaustion. Another said he was hearing things that weren't there. Dale knew he was pushing them past safe limits, but he didn't have a choice. If he didn't finish the contract, he would lose everything. The crew understood that. They were grinding through it. But the cost was mounting, and it wasn't just physical. The psychological toll was becoming visible. People were snapping at each other. Tempers were short. Mistakes were happening. A grain cart operator misjudged a turn and clipped the side of a semi, causing $1,200 in damage. A combine operator forgot to check the oil level and ran a machine low, damaging the engine seals. Small errors that added up. Dale felt like he was managing a disaster in slow motion. And the worst part was that even with the heroic effort, they were still behind schedule. Day 10 brought the hail back. Worse this time. The storm hit at 4 p.m. and lasted an hour. Golf ball-sized hail. It shattered 3 windshields on the combines. It dented the hoods. It destroyed 200 acres of uncut wheat, flattening it completely. Dale stood in the staging area and watched the storm hammer his equipment. He didn't even react anymore. He was numb. The math had already turned against him. He knew he wasn't going to make the 12-day deadline. He knew he was going to lose money on this job. The only question now was how much. He radioed the crew and told them to shut down for the day. There was no point in cutting through hail. They would resume in the morning. Day 11 was when the third Massey Ferguson failed. Not catastrophically, not like the engine blow or the fire, but mechanically, terminally. The CVT transmission started slipping under load. The combine would bog down, lose ground speed, and struggle to maintain power. The operator, a guy named Vince, radioed Dale and said the machine was barely functional. Dale told him to keep running it. Vince said it was getting worse. Dale said he didn't care. They needed every machine they had. Vince kept cutting. By the end of the day, the transmission was slipping so badly that the combine could only operate at half speed. Dale pulled Vince off the machine and reassigned him. He called a local mechanic to come look at the Massey Ferguson. The mechanic arrived the next morning, ran diagnostics, and said the CVT clutch packs were destroyed. The repair would require a full transmission rebuild. Parts and labor would cost $42,000, and it would take 3 weeks. Dale asked if there was any way to keep it running. The mechanic said no. The transmission was done. Running it any further would cause additional damage to the drivetrain. Dale stood next to the third Massey Ferguson and did the math. He had started the job with 3 of them. One had a blown engine and was sitting in a dealer lot in Minot. One had burned and was waiting for an insurance adjuster. And now the third one had a destroyed transmission. All 3 Massey Ferguson 9505s were out of commission. He still owed $340,000 in combined loan balances on machines that were either dead, damaged, or disabled. And he was 11 days into a job that was supposed to take 12, with 1,500 acres still uncut. Day 12 was the official deadline. Dale didn't hit it. He missed it by 3 days. The crew kept cutting with the remaining 4 combines, all of which were older machines, slower, less efficient. They finished the contract on day 15, 18,000 acres, 15 days, $95,000 in revenue. But the costs had exploded. Fuel had run over budget by $8,000 because of the extra days. Labor had run over by $11,000. Lodging and food had run over by $4,000. The hydraulic line repair on day 2 had cost $2,200. The hail damage to the windshields had cost $3,800. Towing the first Massey Ferguson had cost $1,500. The grain cart collision repair had cost $1,200. Miscellaneous repairs and parts had cost another $6,200. Dale's total expenses came to $73,000. That left him with $22,000 in gross profit. But he still had to pay for the mobilization and demobilization costs, which hadn't been included in the expense tally. Those added another $9,000. His net profit was $13,000. $13,000 for a job that was supposed to net $57,000. And that didn't account for the lost equipment. The first Massey Ferguson, the one with the blown engine, was still sitting at the dealer lot in Minot. Dale couldn't afford to repair it. He couldn't afford to tow it back to Oklahoma. He made the decision to abandon it. He signed the title over to the dealer and told them to sell it for parts. The dealer sold it at auction 3 months later for $38,000. Dale still owed $140,000 on the loan. The bank demanded payment on the deficiency balance. Dale negotiated a settlement and paid $62,000 out of pocket to close the loan. He lost $102,000 on that machine. The second Massey Ferguson, the one that burned, was eventually totaled by the insurance company. They paid out $128,000. Dale owed $155,000 on the loan. He paid the $27,000 deficiency out of pocket. He lost $142,000 on that machine, counting the loan payoff and the lost value. The third Massey Ferguson, the one with the failed transmission, made it back to Oklahoma on a trailer. Dale parked it in his equipment yard and tried to sell it. No one wanted a combine with a blown CVT. He eventually sold it 8 months later for $75,000 to a salvage buyer. He still owed $145,000 on the loan. He paid the $70,000 deficiency out of pocket. He lost $195,000 on that machine. In total, Dale lost $439,000 on the 3 Massey Ferguson 9505s. He netted $13,000 on the North Dakota contract. The final accounting showed a net loss of $426,000. The job that was supposed to save his season destroyed his fleet and nearly bankrupted his company. Dale spent the next 2 years digging out of the debt. He sold 2 of his semis. He sold his personal truck. He refinanced his house. He took contracts he would have normally refused just to generate cash flow. His wife told him he should have walked away from the North Dakota job the moment the first Massey Ferguson failed. Dale said he couldn't. He had signed a contract. She said the contract wasn't worth losing everything. Dale didn't have an answer for that. By 2025, Mercer Custom Harvest was operating with 4 combines, 2 grain carts, and 4 semis. Half the fleet he had started with. None of the combines were Massey Fergusons. Dale sold the remaining machines and switched to a different brand. Not because Massey Ferguson made bad equipment, but because every time he looked at a red combine, he thought about North Dakota. He thought about the blown engine, the fire, the destroyed transmission. He thought about the 1,800 miles, the hail, the operator who quit, the 15-day grind that should have taken 12. He thought about the $426,000 he lost, chasing a contract that looked good on paper and turned into a nightmare in reality. And he thought about the fact that he had started that job with 6 combines and came home with 3. 2 of the lost machines were Massey Fergusons. Both of them were financed. Both of them were gone, and he was still paying for them years after they stopped existing. The client in North Dakota hired a different crew the next season. They didn't call Dale. They didn't need to. Word travels fast in the custom harvesting world. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew Dale had lost half his fleet on a single job. That kind of loss doesn't inspire confidence. It inspires caution. Dale still runs custom harvest contracts. He still follows the wheat, but he doesn't take jobs 1,800 miles from home anymore. He doesn't take aggressive timelines. He doesn't push his equipment past safe limits, and he doesn't finance new machines. He runs what he has until it dies, and then he buys used equipment with cash. The North Dakota job taught him that. It cost him $426,000 to learn it, but he learned it, and he will never forget it. The 3 Massey Ferguson 9505s are gone. One sits in pieces in a salvage yard in Nebraska. One was scrapped after the fire. One is operating on a farm in Iowa, rebuilt, and running under a different owner who has no idea what that machine cost the man who bought it first. The serial numbers are still in the system. The loan histories are still on record, but the machines themselves have moved on. They don't carry the memory of North Dakota. They don't carry the weight of the failure. Only Dale carries that, and he carries it every day. Every time he looks at his fleet, every time he signs a contract, every time he sees a Massey Ferguson 9505 in a field somewhere, red and massive and powerful, doing exactly what it was designed to do. He knows those machines aren't the problem. The problem was the job. The problem was the distance. The problem was the decision to roll the dice on a contract that required everything to go right, in a business where nothing ever goes completely right. And the problem was believing that equipment, no matter how good, can survive decisions that push it past the breaking point. The Massey Fergusons did what they were built to do. They ran until they couldn't. And when they failed hard. And Dale paid the price, $426,000. 3 machines, 1 contract, 1,800 miles from home, only 3 came back.